Hi everyone, William here coming at you today from inside the house with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1917 diary entry. So this is a big change. Of course, the whole summer I was using an outdoor setting in the backyard. And, whoops, my collar is a little askew there. We have a windstorm today, and it's the end of October, so it seemed like the right time to move inside. Some of you will remember this setting. Our recap from the previous video, well, it was literally a day at the races for Dmitri. They had horse racing and steeplechases in Tehran, organized by the president of the Club Imperial, so he went to those. He was not a participant. There were lots of injuries, unfortunately, so perhaps it's just as well that he didn't participate. And today we jump forward to October, so we're now in the same month as Dmitri. It's October as I do this. It's October 4th in 1917, which was a Wednesday, and this is one of his long entries. His long entries in 1917 don't tend to be as long as the ones from, say, 1921, when he would easily write 20 pages for a long diary entry. But for those of you who haven't been watching all along, this was a rather unique way he had of keeping a diary, that every 10 days he would do a longer entry with a kind of summary and more intimate, shall we say, about his thoughts and that sort of thing. So that's what we have today, the first part. As I said, 4th October 1917, a Wednesday, and now we're no longer in Gulag, which is great because I don't know how to pronounce that word. Now we're in Tehran, staying again at the English mission, and here we go. Summer is over. I lived in Gulag with the Marlings for almost 5 months, and the time flew by so quickly that it seemed like only a few weeks. Naturally, I ended up moving with them to their home in the city, though I had a guilty conscience the whole time, knowing it wasn't really the right thing to do. But where else could I live at the moment? It's quite easy to talk about renting an apartment, but difficult to do because one needs furniture, kitchen help, and various things that I don't have here. And my hosts, especially her, of course, were so touching in the way they arranged my room and the pains they took to ensure my comfort that I really couldn't just leave. Of course, I often think that I annoy them both a great deal, and it's bad of me to abuse their hospitality so much, but my egocentricity triumphs because I know perfectly well that things wouldn't be as good for me anywhere else. Now we have a paragraph in English. But my God, how quickly the summer flew by. I little thought that in October I will be still at Tehran. Last month I felt so sure that my days in Persia will come to an end and that I will be able to go back to Russia and there see all my friends. But no, it's October, and about going home I have no notion. I look back upon, this is Russian again, I look back upon a summer that passed amazingly well and peacefully. Sometimes it was actually enjoyable. And if not for the moments of anxiety for dear ones in Petrograd, it could easily be considered amazing. Yes, exclamation point. It's actually even funny now to think about the extent to which I was certain that October would find me no longer in Persia. I was so desperate to go home. I longed for it to such an extent that that terrible desire gave me a certainty based on nothing that I would definitely leave. Now I have decided to drive away these agonizing thoughts that only inflame and oppress me. I have simply stopped thinking about the possible date of my return and the conditions in which it will take place. I live exclusively for today. And since the conditions of today are comparatively and actually excellent, I just praise the Lord for bringing me to live in such a good environment at a time of such difficulty for Russians. And indeed, that is something to be thankful for. October, exclamation point. Soon it will be winter. I can't help but remember last year when I moved into my own new rooms, my short but good excursions to Moscow. Vera, what good times we had. Incidentally, I recently received 2 letters, one from Karaly and the other from Natalia Brasova. It's amazing that she suddenly decided to remember my existence. There's probably been a little turn for the better there in Gatchina. Very touching expressions and signed by Natasha, exclamation point. From Vera in the old style, the poor thing, all she thinks about is me. Karali was probably insanely upset by my letter in which I told her in a pretty dry tone that she should stop all her attempts to come to me and talk about me less. Okay, maybe that was a little over-ambitious of me to cover so much. I'll just say in passing, I always find it, a little amusing at Dmitri's attempt at spelling. He wasn't good at spelling in Russian, let alone in English. So yes, in yesterday's video, we had him trying to spell sure two different ways. First as Shore, S-H-O-R-E, second as Shure, C-H-U-R-E, and today he tries C-H-O-U-R. So we're not getting closer, we're getting further away. And then the word notion, which is charmingly spelled K-N-O-S-H-E-N, so Kenotion, anyway. So the reality for him in Tehran was that he had brought one servant with him, and that was his valet, not an educated man, a soldier. So it would have been his orderly or his batman. His name was, or was he a soldier? Maybe he wasn't. Anyway, he had this valet by the name of Сегодня, an odd name because it means today in Russian. And that was who came with him, and that was it. So he's quite right that if he'd moved into an apartment and he'd wanted to live in the manner that he was accustomed to and not do his own cooking or not have Сегодня do his own cooking, do the cooking, then he would have had to hire a small staff, and he would have had to get furniture because Dmitri was never, ever going to get a place that was pre-furnished. Furniture was so important to him. And he had everything, he had the servants, he had everything he needed at the English mission. So he talked before about how this was such a crisis of conscience for him, and it's not just because of taking advantage of the Marlings' hospitality, because I think they really were happy to have him, at least as he said she was, but it was a matter of being an active duty Russian officer living in a British legation in a country where Russia and Britain were rivals for control and had been for decades. And so that was awkward. And not everybody looked upon that as a good thing. But, Dmitri's honest, and that's what I like about him. He would lie to people. We know that. We saw, for instance, how in 1921 he told a whopper about how he'd been fighting the Turks with the British and so on and so forth. But to himself, he was honest. And that's, that's a rare quality. And that makes him, to me, a person worth all of this effort. So he says it. I'm egocentric. I'm selfish. That's why I'm staying here. I know that it's bad in a number of ways, and I suspect that my hosts are probably, what does he say? I often think that I annoy them both a great deal. Was that true or not? Well, it's hard to have a house guest, even if it's someone you love. That's very true. But on the other hand, this was Dmitri's insecurity. This was the way he always felt, going back to childhood. He was always so aware of people's moods and the possibility that he might be the source of bad feelings. So, I think, I don't know if at this particular point, but I know that Sir Charles regarded him as kind of the oldest son, just like he'd sort of been treated as the oldest son for a while in Nicholas and Alexandra's family. And now the Marlings had 4 children, a boy and 3 girls, but they were little. And, the Marlings really, as I've said before, became surrogate parents to him. A little more complicated with Lucia, but, that, even more than the servants and the comfortable surroundings, was an important thing for him. Let's see. How can he possibly say that summer was peaceful? Well, it was peaceful in Tehran. Yes. How can he say that he could even have enjoyed it? Well, you have to bear in mind that the Bolshevik Revolution had not happened yet. And as alarming as things were with the war and with what was going on post-revolution in Petrograd, you had the provisional government. It was a liberal government. And, Paul wasn't arrested until the end of the summer in August. And so the summer itself, it wasn't looking that bad. So it's not like the Bolsheviks are aggressively taking over and killing people left and right. It's not like that in the summer. So I give him a little bit of a benefit of the doubt there. Apparently his homesickness at that point was quite profound, which is interesting because after his nervous breakdown when he first arrived in Kazvin, he was able to adjust. But the homesickness apparently crept up on him because he's talking about really, really being homesick. Okay, and the things he missed, well, his friends, his new rooms. Boy, this was so important to Dmitri, so important to him to have his rooms exactly as he wanted them, with furniture that he liked, and he'd bought new furniture. He'd gotten himself these gray upholstered, chairs and divans and a tiger skin rug, and he'll give us sort of the inventory later. And the whole ground floor of his palace was a hospital at that time. He allowed the British to come in and build, as to help their allies to put in a military hospital for Russian soldiers. And that was the whole ground floor of Dmitri's palace. But he had his apartments, his rooms, as he says. He had his apartment, and he had newly redone it and refurnished it. And, it's kind of funny how important that was to him, and how whenever he was looking back at, the revolution, there was always this sense of, I lost my apartment, and it was new. I just had it redone. Okay. So that was an issue. What more was, I was just going to remind you or mention, if you haven't watched the 1907 videos for the diary entries from then, that he actually, when he was 16, he went behind, Grand Duchess Elizabeth was his guardian, and he went behind her back and bought new furniture for his rooms. And boy, was she not happy about that. But anyway, I won't go into that. It's just another way of emphasizing how crucial this was to him. We all have the things that give us a sense of security in life, and that was his. So it's interesting to find out that he was making these trips to Moscow. Apparently, Corelli was in Moscow. I don't know if she was on the stage in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but it sounds like he was going to Moscow either to visit her, or they were taking trips to Moscow together whenever he could get away. And he certainly is looking back fondly on her and what good times they had, as he says. But it's over, and he's trying to tell her that. And he talked before about how she wrote this letter, about how, everything was oriented in the letter about either coming to him or arranging secretly for him to come back. And, Dmitri was not so attached to people, and he didn't want her to come there. He wouldn't, how would she live there? It would definitely interfere with his relationship with Lucia and his ability to live at the British legation. And he also didn't want to be talked about back home. He didn't want to be on the radar screen. So there were those two things. So he says that this letter was pretty dry, and telling her that she should just stop. Well, they will be reunited in London, so if we continue on, you'll have a chance to find out about that. The other person, of course, is Natasha Brasova, Oh, she suddenly remembered that I happened to exist. She suddenly decided to remember my existence. Okay, so apparently their relationship hadn't been going too well. You may remember the diary entries from 1915 when he was kind of pursuing her, and then things cooled off a bit. So I would remind you that all of this was going on in 1916, that he was together with Karali, and that he was making the trips to Moscow, and that whatever was going on with Natasha was going on that went sour. So she suddenly decided to remember my existence. Her letter was touching expressions. Okay. And signed by Natasha, exclamation point. What the heck does that mean? Wouldn't you sign a letter that you wrote? He says that he got a letter from Natalia Brasova. He doesn't say that it came from Michael and that she signed it. So I'm not sure what the emphasis is on that. Vera was writing in the old style, which is not the orthography, but I think what he means by that is the way she wrote to him when they were still lovers, when they were separated, he was on duty or whatever. Okay, well, he's going to be reunited with both of these women. And let me just say that I don't know what he means by when he says there's probably been a little turn for the better in Gatchina. Does he mean because of the revolution, of the liberal revolution with the provisional government in place? Has it made things easier for Michael and Natasha? It's hard to see how it would. So I don't know. Any of you who know Michael and Natasha better than I do can maybe fill me in on that, if you would be so kind. So what do we have next time? We have one of the few mentions of Rasputin, more about the rooms that have been lost, and very, very interestingly, something about the actress Timme, Timme, who Dmitri is going to tell us all about her and how and why she's an important person to him, and the rumors that he's hearing about her. Okay, so come back for that, and I'll see you then. Bye.